At Emory, we are finishing up a year of transition to Canvas from Blackboard. So the questions that I'm looking at this morning are questions that we wanted to answer for ourselves. So I thought I should propose to present about this. I've got to do this work, and it might be interesting to some others who are getting started with Canvas data or in the midst of a transition or even completing it. I think the abstract indicated that this is an administrator-focused presentation. I'm going to spend the bulk of my time actually talking about the queries that we used. So it's going to be a lot of SQL. So are you all familiar with SQL at all? You are. That's really good. OK. Even if you're not, it can make sense if you've learned some other coding languages. So let's jump in. If you want to follow along with the queries that I'm going to be talking about, I uploaded them to GitHub, and you can download them at this address, github.com/samtimmeeemory/instacon17. And that's going to be on my last slide as well. I'm going to have the parts of the query that I'm focusing on my slides, so you don't have to download them. Or if the internet doesn't work for a second, it's not a big problem. But if you want to follow along with the whole queries and just save them, that's where you can do it. Before we, sorry? I sure can. The way that we've been using Canvas data, we asked them to turn it on right when they released it in November of 2015. And we've been downloading the flat files that are available once a day. And we've been building our own MySQL database that's hosted locally at Emory. So we're not using the Amazon Web Services Redshift service. And the way that we're doing reporting so far, I would say that we're not quite in full production for our implementation of Canvas data at Emory. We're getting there. But the way that we're doing reports so far is I'm writing queries and running them. We're not using visualization yet, and we haven't started delivering data to specific schools yet. Yeah, so we're self-hosted MySQL, and our reports are via custom queries. So the first of my questions is the larger one. Who are our new adopters, and how will we find them? One of the kind of selling points of Canvas when we were thinking about transitioning was that more people would adopt it if it was easier to use than our previous LMS, which was Blackboard. So I had to ask myself, right, what would a new adopter be? Somebody who taught an active Canvas course and somebody who had not adopted our previous LMS. In other words, somebody who was a teacher during the same past couple years so that we had our old LMS and we were looking at our activity, but did not have active courses. So the first part of this that's important, right, is our definition of an active course. Our definition is not a particularly deep definition of activity for a course for the purposes of kind of reporting. We don't have, like some schools do, an instructional design service for people in the College of Arts and Sciences. And we also don't have a mandate that teachers use the LMS even to put up their syllabus. So if they choose to have no activity in our LMS, that's up to them for the time being. So we're just looking at, kind of basic adoption. And the first thing that we wanted to see was that there was some student access in a course. And the second thing that we wanted to see was that there was some content in the course. And for Canvas, we're looking at assignments, discussions, or announcements, files, quizzes, and wikis. These are kind of 5 types of content that Canvas data has broken down into dimension and fact tables that we can look at. So the chunk of our query that addresses student activity as one of the criteria for an active course looks like this. We join onto the course table, the course dimension table, a subquery that combines enrollment information from the enrollment dim table and activity information from the requests table, right? So we're just selecting for this subquery the course ID where we find a record in this join that somebody whose enrollment is of a student type has a request. And we also guarantee that it's not me or one of my coworkers masquerading as a student to create that activity by looking that the real user ID field on the requests table is null. And then by grouping that by course ID, you just get one record per course. Call that subquery student access and join it to the courses table, and you exclude every course that has no student access. For the second course activity criterion, we're going to look at 5 different kinds of tables: assignments, discussions, files, wikis, and quizzes. And for these, because we don't want to exclude courses that have no activity in some one of those categories, but we only want to find the courses that have activity in at least one of them, it's not joins, but left joins onto the course dimension table, and then counts that I do. So for the assignment facts table, we select the course ID and the count of records for distinct assignments according to the assignment ID field. And then we group that by course and call it assignments and left join it onto the course dimension table. And then for every record where a course has no assignments, there's going to be just null values on that part of the join. So at the end of the course activity query in the where statements, we want something where either the assignments or the discussions or the files or the quizzes or the wikis are not null. So for discussions, it looks exactly the same, except that we're using the discussion topic fact table. And it looks the same for a file fact, quiz fact, and wiki page fact. All of those have a course ID value that you can group by. So those little sections of the query, the student access portion and the content portion, go into a larger query, right? And this is the query where we say, is this teacher in an active course? And so both of those ones go kind of right in the middle, the ones that we just looked at. We joined student access, and the 5 content types are left joined. So I use the integration ID field. Some schools don't use it, it's not required. There's also SIS ID, which is on the pseudonym dim table. And for all this kind of aggregation work, that's the only table that I use. I don't use the user dimension table because it has identifying information like name, and it has the Canvas ID, but it doesn't have the ID that our other systems use, right? So unique name is the login ID field. SIS user ID is what's coming in from your student information system. And then we have another system that provides an ID that's used by all of our content management at Emory. We put that in the integration ID field and call it public person ID. So the yield of this query is unique individuals and a count of how many active courses they're in by joining the pseudonym dim table to the enrollments table on the user ID field. That's on both of those tables. And then joining the courses Joining student access rather than left joining it eliminates every course that doesn't have a student access. And in the where statements, I put that the enrollment type must equal teacher enrollment. There's another field that you could use, which is role ID on enrollment dim. But if you've customized the roles, instead of just using the ones that come with Canvas, it's easier to use type, because that only has those set values of the roles that come with Canvas. Also, I just put that the enrollment workflow state has to be active. It could also be deleted. Why is that relevant? If somebody ended up not teaching in a semester, but they were slated to, right, our student information system would have sent us those enrollments and then they would be there. But if they couldn't teach for whatever reason, then their enrollments would be set to deleted by our student information system, and I don't want to get them into my count. Finally, the course workflow state can't be deleted. I do allow it to be claimed, which means not published, in the terms that are used on these tables in Canvas data. And that's because what I'm using to do the work of excluding irrelevant courses is actually student access and not published status for a course. So that's all part A of the definition of what a new adopter will be. It's going to be somebody who has a teacher enrollment in at least one course that has activity, right? An activity is a student access and some content. The second type is looking for somebody who's a non-adopter of the previous LMS. And here I'm actually going to be showing you queries that I run against Blackboard's database, not against Canvas's, so we won't go into too much detail. They may be relevant. That's available at the GitHub address that I gave you at the beginning. If you're transitioning from Blackboard to Canvas, if you're in the same situation, this query might be useful to you. So, how do we define non-adopters? I had to ask myself that, and I went through a couple of counts to find what I thought would be a definition of who are relevant non-adopters of our previous LMS. And I was looking at somebody who's got a teacher enrollment in some courses, but none of them active courses. During our transition year, which was, I was looking at fall 2016 and spring 2017. And also, in one of the semesters, main semesters in the 2 prior years, so I added fall 2015, spring 16, fall 2014, and spring 15 to find somebody who is in a course as a teacher, but the course isn't active. So this is for Blackboard's database schema, which should be valid for like the 5 previous versions for these very important tables. I just joined the course main table to the term, to the enrollments, which is course users, and to users. I selected where the course row status equals 0. That's equivalent to saying that the course is not deleted in Canvas, and that the course user row status is 0. That's equivalent to saying that the enrollment workflow state is not deleted in Canvas. And then I chose the ones where the term was from our transition year, fall 16 or spring 17, where the enrollment role was teacher. That's P on that table, and then grouped it by user. So that's one subquery that's going to go into finding these non-adopters in Blackboard. Basically, exactly the same query is used in another subquery, but specifying that the semester terms have those codes. And then those go into a larger query where I find people who are potential new adopters of Canvas because they had not adopted it by grouping the users and then left joining the transition year and the 2 years prior as separate tables, and finding non-null counts. I was finding those people. Another query I used was to find the people who are in active courses in Blackboard, and these queries work in much the same way that the Canvas queries do, except the tables are laid out a little bit differently. There are just two that I looked at for the criteria of content creation in Blackboard. There's an announcements table. That's its homepage and its most popular feature with all of our faculty. And there's also one that's called course content. So to find active courses in Blackboard, I join users to their enrollments to account for how many records there are in announcements and course content. And then I add, this works a little bit differently, because there's a field on the enrollment table in Blackboard, course users, last access date. So I add this as a where term to select only the records where there's been some student access, and call that course activity. And then we select only the records where the enrollment for the teacher is not deleted, and then only the records where the course has at least one announcement and a count that's greater than 3. This might be different for other universities, but our blank course template in Blackboard puts 3 records on the course content table because we put 3 empty content areas there. So to find somewhere where a teacher has added something, I look for a count greater than 3. So those last 2 queries go into one final query where we find all the people who could have but did not adopt Blackboard in the relevant years. I just group by that same ID that's used by all of our systems that's in our Canvas integration ID field so that I can use it in another query. I select that ID from the potential adopters and then join on the list of people who are in active courses in a left join, and then I only select the records where the count is null. So by negating activity in that way, selecting only the records where there are no active courses for them, I select all the people who did not adopt the previous LMS. Does that make sense? So that gives me some values that I then plug into the query that we described for Canvas data schema. We want to select from the pseudonym dim table, their enrollments, their courses, everything that's in the teachers in an active course query. So that's going to say that they were active in Canvas in either fall 16 or spring 17. They adopted Canvas during our transition year. And then we want to select where their ID is in the list that I got by querying Blackboard for all of the people whose public person IDs matched our non-adopters list. So that's kind of the approach to our new adopters. We're going to look at results after I show you both queries. The second question that I was asking is, who are our laggards in adopting Canvas? This grew out of something that we did in February and March. After we had gotten the spring semester rolling, we did what we called a faculty audit, and we were looking at who was using active courses in Blackboard and Canvas. And then we got all that data, aligned it, got together with instructional designers from our various schools, and shared that data with them so that they would know who they'd need to contact for kind of nudging them along. So From that, I think I got the idea that we could define laggards in our transition as somebody who is inactive in their Canvas courses during our transition. And the second criterion I added after kind of looking at counts, thinking about who we were matching, thinking about people's different circumstances and why we had urged them to transition. And if somebody wasn't teaching in this upcoming fall 17 semester, I thought I shouldn't call them a laggard. I don't know why they weren't active during our transition year. It may have been their last year teaching. It may have been their only year teaching at Emory. So if they're not kind of in the position to be teaching right after the transition is over, I didn't want to include them in this count. That kind of cut the count way down. So inactive in courses during the transition. How did I find this? I got, again, those IDs for every person from the pseudonym dim table and joined on the enrollments and joined on subqueries. One of them, called enabled courses, just finds all of the courses in the relevant semester where the course is not deleted and the teacher is enrolled as a teacher. And then, so that I could get counts, I created left join subqueries to look at the active course query for different semesters for the fall 2016, for the spring 2017, and then 2 more enabled course queries. Those aren't looking for activity, they're just looking to break down which enabled courses we're looking at. One, the transition subquery, looks at fall 2016 and spring 2017, and enabled fall 2017, that's the one that tells me they're teaching in the upcoming semester. And we find that by specifying the right fields in the where statements, that their enrollment type, again, is teacher enrollment, that it's an active enrollment, and then for the first 2, that the subqueries in the activity tables have null values. That means they didn't use them, their courses were not active. And that their values are not null in both of the other subqueries. That means that they were a teacher in each of those periods. And that groups them by an ID. And I also selected last request at, which is available on the pseudonym dim table. Because I wanted to see how many of these people have never logged into Canvas. That's what we actually did in our audit in the spring. And there's something that's more alarming about seeing next to somebody's ID that they've never accessed Canvas. And it tells you, your instructional designers, your IT directors, this is somebody that I really need to pay attention to. So that's both queries explained. Now we're going to look at the results that I got. New adopters. What are we looking at? I found that 46 faculty members met the definition of new adopter of Canvas during our transition year. And there were 194 non-adopters that I found, according to the Blackboard query. So that means 24% of them adopted. I'm pretty happy about that. I think that's pretty good. The percentage of non-adopters that we have was actually lower than I was expecting because of how many active courses we have. But I think on reflection, that's not so strange. A lot of faculty probably are enrolled in 2, 3, 4 classes in a semester, and they might only use the LMS for some of them. So we have people, 10.6% of people who are non-adopters in Blackboard. About a quarter of them adopted Canvas, which is good. Our Laggard results. Once I added the restriction that they had to be teaching in the upcoming semester, we found 529 people who are going to be teaching who had no active courses last year. So that's kind of a lot of laggards. 42% of them had no access date in Canvas as of last week. That's a lot. 223 of them. We have 5 weeks left until our transition is complete. What are the implications of these findings? Obviously, more people who are non-adopters of Blackboard can be reached. There are other considerations about why they didn't adopt Blackboard. A quarter of them became new adopters. That's money, that's wonderful. And a quarter of them will not be teaching in the upcoming semester. A quarter of the 194 non-adopters aren't teaching the upcoming semester. I don't know why. Maybe they're on leave, maybe they're retiring, maybe it was their last term teaching at Emory on a contract. There could be a lot of reasons. So a quarter of them, kind of no worries for our transition goals. And then half of the half of the non-adopters of Blackboard, 95 of them, also came up in my Laggard query. So sad cat there, I guess. Implications from the Laggard findings, 529 of them make up 43% of 1,218 candidates. Those candidates are people who taught in one of the semesters last year and will be teaching in fall 2017. And that compares to last spring, 40% of courses that were active being in our old LMS. People were able to migrate on a voluntary basis unless their school mandated that they move, and so a lot of them took their time. The fact that we had 60% of courses active in the second semester of a 2-semester transition, I found pretty heartening. 95 of the Laggards were non-adopters of our old LMS. Only 21 of them have accessed Canvas. So the others, they're probably not very likely to be adopting Canvas in the fall. So almost 1/5 of the Laggards are non-adopters. They're probably not going to ask us for help in August. But 128 Laggards who have not accessed Canvas will probably move in August because they didn't fall into the they didn't fall into the non-adopter query. So there's going to be people to help. But I think we're ready. I've got 10 minutes left in this time, and kind of went through that as quickly as I could. There's a lot of specifics that we could talk about. We've got time for questions. Let me know if you have any.
What are your strategies for when your timeline is so you pull the plug on Blackboard, your fall sessions going to all parents, right? So say that our school in Chris College, does your team have any strategies for dealing with what you predict is very large requests 2 weeks before fall term starts?
Yeah, so the question was, what's our strategy for dealing with August and the large number of requests that we're expecting? One of our strategies has been templating. We have got a new instructional designer in 2017 who's been working on a couple of templates that will be good for people in the College of Arts and Sciences, which makes up 2/3 of our population, and they don't have a designated instructional designer. So we're going to launch some new training initiatives for how they can use templates. We have been using since last August a product called LibCal that people can use to make online appointments with any of us, and there are half a dozen of us. So part of our strategy is being available. And part of our communication strategy is reaching out to them every week for the last 3 and the next 5. And by looking at the numbers for the last few years, I know that some people had activity in their course later than add drop week. I ran the numbers for active courses after add drop in the spring and also at the end of the semester, and they increased by almost 100 courses, right? So that's like Laggards within a semester, right? And they're going to be coming. If they haven't migrated their materials, I hope that they're the kind of people who kept everything on local disk. We're reaching out to them as often as we can.
We had Blackboard shut off, and we had a preemptive canopy telling you what's going to happen. So there's still some people that claim that they were, where did this go from? We sent probably 9 forms of communication. So, but I mean, overall, it's going to be smooth.
Mhm.
So the templates is really good.
Yeah.
How are you getting the Canvas data into MySQL?
There's a script that was written by James Jones in Canvancements.
Is that on GitHub? Or?
Yeah, it's in his GitHub, and if you search for Canvancements, you can find all of his stuff that's shared on GitHub.
Yeah, how long does it take? You know, like to get all that in there?
Yeah, so it depends on how long does it take to load the MySQL database? It depends on speed of your connection. For me, it also depends on the performance of your tables. I found that it got bogged down when I was loading directly into the request table and hadn't broken it up in any way pretty early on. So one strategy that I've used is adding a table that's called stage requests and loading into that and then doing an insert from that into the other table. Also, partitioning the request table helps a lot. I partition it by month, and that increases its performance a great deal because of the way that table disk space is managed in MySQL. So how long does it take? I think right now with those changes, it's taking about 15 minutes to update for us, a daily dump. And at the end of last fall, before I partitioned the table, it could take an hour. Yeah, so we use a bash script to load that in. Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's a session on Canvancements later. Definitely worth checking out.
We can really deeper dive into what an active course means. Because one of the questions that we have is, are faculty just using it as a file box? Are they just using it to return grades? Are they actually using it for coursework? So we can't try to answer some questions.
Yeah, that's a good question. The question is, are we going to do a deeper dive and a deeper definition of course activity? Yes. I don't have it yet. We adopted this, I think I called it earlier, a shallow or thin, simple definition of what an active course is about 4 years ago to figure out what our usage was. And we knew that our faculty, the vast majority of them, weren't using it very deep. We have some numbers from a couple years ago when in the past we had licensed BB Analytics. But I haven't translated those queries for Canvas data yet, but it should be possible to do so. I think one strategy that's employed in the current active courses query is to say, some count in assignments or discussion topic or file or wiki or quiz. And if you increase that, maybe it's 3 of 5. Then you could get an idea of deeper adoption. Or if you looked for a count that was greater than 1, because I'm allowing a count of 1 in those. And then maybe by kind of stacking those or actually pulling the counts and then aggregating in a data visualization, you could get a picture of depth. But I haven't done that yet, so yeah, hopefully I'll be sharing that. Yeah, so the question is, if I understood, if all of the things that the teachers use are in LTI tools, yeah, do we count those? I don't think that a class that only used external tools would match the definition that I gave. That's right. Unless it was passing back, if it was passing back from the LTI into Canvas, there would be a record on the assignment dim and fact tables. Yeah, so it depends on how the integration is set up between the LTI and Canvas. If they're only using Canvas as a portal to pass students through, and they're not grading in Canvas, right, and they're not driving it back to Canvas, that's not going to appear as an active course according to my query, and I think I'm fine with that, actually. I don't know if we have... Wow, half of your faculty, that is a lot. Yeah. Right, instead of just passing through. Yeah. If they... With a request table, you're suggesting with the request table. Yeah. Yeah, using the request table is a good idea by searching for URLs because it's like /external tool _ ID, right? You could look at those patterns. Yeah, I haven't done that yet, but I'm going to think about it. Thank you. Yeah, if you all want to talk about optimizing the request table, we could do that maybe right afterwards. Are there any other questions about the kind of Laggard query or the new adopter query? I appreciate so much that you all came. This has been wonderful.